Hey there folks, Leo Alderpole. Just smoking the last of some Rattray's Brown Cluny. Fantastic stuff. Now, the last woodland video that I did was perhaps a little bit negative. I often moan about not having any wilderness in this country. And there's a good reason for it. But I figured I'd do another video that was a little bit more upbeat. Because what we lack in wilderness in this country, we more than make up for in history. And all of our woodlands, one way or another, are a direct connection to our history as a nation and the growth of this nation. And particularly the growth of industrialization in this country. Now, the woodland that I'm walking through right now is what we call an ancient woodland, which I've always found to be a very interesting choice of word, but it is actually what they're officially known as. Now, as you can probably see around me, the trees on this hillside, this valley that I'm walking through, are anything but ancient. What we mean by an ancient woodland is that there's been woodland on this site for 400 years or more. And you can tell a lot about the history of a landscape and the history of that woodland by looking at the woodland that's on it. This woodland in particular is up on the edge of Exmoor in a place called Heddon Valley. I'll just give you a pan around shot. Now back down that way is the coast where I've just come from, and I'm going to upload directly after this video. I'm going to upload another one to show you where I've just been. But the way it relates to this woodland is a couple of things. Now, woodland has always been on this site for a reason. If you look around me, I'm actually in a pretty steep valley. I'm surrounded by hillsides. There's a little bit of a flat area there, which is now grazing, river. But either side is this steep sort of hillside covered in trees. And the reason for that is because you basically couldn't do anything else with it. You couldn't farm this land. It's far too rocky, far too steep, and also far too barren for a lot of other things. But more importantly than that, this woodland right here had a role to play in what happened further down the coast there. Because historically this woodland would have been coppiced, and all of the products that came out of here would have actually been firewood. Because much like many other woodlands of this type, it's got a direct link to our industrial heritage. And that, in this particular case, is lime kilns. Now what would have happened further back down the coast where I've just come from there, and as I say, you'll see the video afterwards, hopefully, of the one which I'll upload after this one. There's a lime kiln. So the lime would have come in on boats, limestone would have come in on boats, but obviously being big and bulky, you couldn't transport that inland. So you had to process it on the shore, and this woodland would have provided the fuel for that. So they would have brought the lime in, loaded it into the kiln, taken the wood out of this woodland and used it to turn that limestone into the lime, agricultural lime that was spread on fields to fertilise them. Now the beauty of having these ancient woodlands, what we call ancient woodlands, is they're also much more botanically diverse than the last woodland that I showed you. If you remember, in the last woodland that I was in, I pointed out underneath the Douglas fir and the larch and the spruce that I was sitting under, we had about 3 species that were there present, because in that kind of silvicultural system you really don't have anything much in the way of botanical diversity. In a woodland like this, it's quite the opposite. For a start, we're actually on a much more base-rich soil, and you can tell that by some of the plants that are in here. We've got this hartstongue fern right here, for example. If you can see that, that's an indicator species of a lime-rich soil. And what else have we got? We've got some dog's mercury here and a few other bits and pieces. And we're already seeing much more botanical diversity in this land, in this piece of woodland. So that's pretty good. The woodland itself consists mostly of species like this oak here behind me. And what will have happened, I'll see if I can find you an example a little bit further up. Although this is an ancient woodland, none of the trees here will be 400 years old or more. You're really looking at about 80 to 100 years worth of growth in any tree, but many of those trees will have grown from a coppice stool. So this will be an example of one right here behind me, where you've got a number of stems that have grown up from a stump that's been cut, and then it's grown back, and then it's cut back again after numerous years when it's reached the size that you could use as firewood. What you also get are all these lichens and mosses, and you can't probably see, but actually some of the colour in the hills on the hill opposite, if you can't really see with this camera, but there's lichens growing up in the trees, and that's a really good indicator of clean air. So woodlands like this will have long been associated with mining activities, or agricultural lime production, or various other things like this. And so a woodland like this will actually walk you essentially through the history of industrialization. These woodlands had a part to play either in providing fuel for firewood. Actually, in one woodland up near where I worked in Wales, there was a gunpowder factory. And the wood there was used to produce charcoal dust for the production of gunpowder. As I say, this one was for fuel wood. There's a good coppice stool there right behind me. I mean, that's probably, yeah, you see, I'll see if I can bring you up to it. I mean, that's a pretty old coppice stool right there. I mean, that's going to be a couple of 100 years old, that stump, but each of these trees growing out of it, you know, you're only looking 80 to 100 years old. So, but the actual tree stump itself could be hundreds of years old. Oops. Watch my footing. So the other thing with these steep-valleyed, steep-sided woodlands was they were used to produce pit props for mining. Quite often, when you've got steep ground like this, you'll have mine shafts or adits going into the hillside. And they might have been mining for copper or tin or lead or coal or any number of other things. And the woodlands that have grown up around it will have been used to produce pit props, and also fuel for electricity generation in later years and so on. So the point I'm making, I guess, is that all woodlands in this country, to one degree or another, have a long history of management. And as I said in a previous video, the history of woodlands in this country is very much a history of fluctuation. They fluctuate. Our amount of woodland cover has fluctuated dependent upon the economic demands of that particular time in history. And this woodland's no exception, but this woodland's now protected, and it's protected because of its ancient woodland status, also because of a number of other things. I think there are quite rare species of lichens, mosses, liverworts, woodland birds, that sort of thing. But the species diversity is also greater than you'd have in many other places. So fortunately we give protection to some of these woodlands. Now, I'll often bemoan not having a wilderness to escape to in this country, but I guess knowing a little bit about the history of these places, that's what kind of acts as solace for me in that respect. It sort of makes up for the fact that I can't escape to the wilderness. So but I can escape into the woods and at least feel a little bit of the history of them. So there you go, another little video on a little bit of our history here in Woodlands. I'll do a few more to come, and in the meantime I'll bid you folks a good time, and I'll see you later.